We are talking waivers today, Field Yates. Stephania, we are talking Monday Night Football recap. We are going to get into all the things that you need to know heading into week 2. How'd you fare in week 1, though? I want to hear from both you guys.
Hold on, timeout. Timeout. See, when you have a timeout, you got to use it.
You use your timeout.
You use your timeout. So rather than keep it in your back pocket, we're going to use our timeout early here on Fantasy Focus. Well be back in 30 seconds. Hope you stay with us.
I'm going to go kick a 64-yarder.
Yeah.
You could, though. The thing is that I know Stephania could kick.
I got a strong leg.
I have no doubt about that. I have no doubt. All right, we can actually do the football stuff now. Sorry, I just want to make sure I got that. Again, you never want to leave a timeout in your pocket, or 2 of them, or 3 for 40 seconds.
You know who was frustrated watching that game last night?
Me.
You. Well,
Everyone in
Broncos
Denver?
fans.
Broncos fans.
Yeah.
If you watch the Manning cast at all, like watching Peyton Manning specifically towards the end of that game, oh my gosh.
It was like he couldn't stop.
You got to think about this though. That's Peyton's former team, or one of the 2 of them.
I know.
He can't tee off on the Broncos like he can tee off. Like if that's any team not named Indianapolis or Denver, Peyton is apoplectic. Veins are popping in his forehead if that's not the Broncos.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
All of us were. I put my phone down because I try to, at the end of these Monday Night Football games, put my phone down because I want to enjoy them. And to be honest with you, I want to try to get to bed shortly after Monday Night Football is over. And they say that having your screen on has certain kind of light that keeps you awake. Last night, I'm sitting there and I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
What are you doing, Nathaniel Hackett? We'll talk about that more in a second. But gosh.
We got a lot to be able to get through today. Let's just get started with Monday Night Football. Let's start with the positives. How about freaking Geno Smith? Good for that guy, huh?
I know.
Yeah.
How about that?
Doesn't really change a whole lot for me for fantasy, but good for Geno from that standpoint.
They wrote him off, but he didn't write back.
He didn't write back.
I mean, honestly, watching this team and watching the Seahawks take down the Broncos 17-16. Geno, 23 for 28, 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not really moving the needle. Doesn't do a whole lot for me from a fantasy standpoint. There's a couple of fantasy takeaways, but more than anything, I'm just stoked for Geno and this Seahawks team to be able to come away with a W in week 1.
Yeah, really happy for Geno Smith, a guy who's been through a lot during his career, a player who arrived at the NFL with great acclaim, right? He had a 40 touchdown, 1 interception season at West Virginia. Incredible during his final college season. Hasn't panned out in the NFL like he probably thought he would, but he gets the chance to start, played well, managed the emotions well last night. 23 of 28 was his stat line last night for 195 yards and a pair of touchdowns. 2 tight ends caught touchdowns, Will Dissly and then Colby Parkinson, a draft pick a year or 2 ago out of Stanford. But in any event, you're right, Daniel. It's not so much about Geno Smith's stats and whether he's going to all of a sudden crack lineups or whether he is the answer to your Dak Prescott problem. We'll dive into Dak a little bit more. It's about what it means for the rest of this offense. And I think that's where the wide receiver conversation becomes interesting. I was encouraged by Geno's play. I thought he played solid. Last night, the end result for DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, 7 catches for 36 yards for DK Metcalf. 3 catches for 28 yards for Tyler Lockett.
Not great.
So it was fine. Here's what I liked for DK Metcalf. He got a lot of volume.
Yeah, he did.
7 catches is good. That was as many as he had in any game last year. That's good. He was also facing a very, very difficult matchup. Pat Surtain has the makings of being one of the NFL's great players for a long time. Those 2 caveats, I think, are worth noting right now. But as we talked about coming into this season, the 2 big changes is that touchdown upside, probably a bit less likely, and vertical passing game opportunities, probably a little bit less likely. And Geno Smith's average depth of target was just 5.4 yards last night, which was 27th of 32 starting quarterbacks. So there were some good signs from Geno Smith, but week 1 sort of confirmed that the path to 2 Seahawks being top 20 wide receivers or even top 25 wide receivers is a different and more difficult one this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to Field's point, Stephania, when you talk about that low ADOT, that's completely opposite of what Tyler Lockett's game is. It feels like from a wide receiver perspective, DK Metcalf, sort of like we saw coming into this game, is probably the only fantasy starter from this wide receiving core, with Tyler Lockett being more of a dart throw if you need some upside.
Yeah, and I got to give Field his props because he's been on DK Metcalf from the beginning, and I just want to stay completely away from the pass catchers in Seattle, so I have like no shares of them on my fantasy team. I was sort of worried about this from the beginning, knowing what kind of players they are, and not really expecting a vertical threat in the Seahawks offense. I was more excited about Rashad Penny,
Yeah.
if I may.
Let's talk about Rashad Penny then.
I thought he ran incredibly strong. He looked like the truck that he is when he's running. He looked like what we saw at the end of last year. And he also got the opportunities. I think he had 14 of Seattle's 15 running back touches, and he just looked like he could mow people down. And if he stays healthy, he's the guy.
He is the guy, and no Ken Walker last night. He's still dealing with that hernia issue. So I thought Rashad Penny once again passed the eye test. The same concerns about Rashad Penny's fantasy value also were revealed last night, right, Daniel? Because just 2 catches for Rashad Penny. If he doesn't score a touchdown or have insane volume on the ground like he did last year, he's just sort of in that. He reminds me of like a better version of Damien Harris right now.
And I love Stephania's point. I thought he looked great while he was out there. He ran really hard. But this game script, I felt like favored what you would expect if you were a Rashad Penny manager. It is a low-scoring game. They're trying to grind out the clock. And even in this game where it wasn't high scoring, where they were utilizing him from just a running perspective, still only 8.7 fantasy points. So that's a thing to look forward. Not a whole lot changed for me as far as the Seahawks from a fantasy perspective after this game. However, on the other side of the ball, I love being able to watch Javonte Williams. That is my biggest takeaway from this entire Broncos game for me.
Yeah, there's some good and bad here, right?
There is certainly some good and bad.
So but the bad's not his fault, right?
No, I don't think the bad is his fault. But to this point, I just want to say this really quickly for the running backs. Javonte Williams just looks like the guy. I know we talked about how it's going to be a 50-50 split. We've been talking back and forth all draft season about how we wondered how this was going to work out. Yeah. Melvin Gordon looked good when he got the ball, but Javonte Williams with his 12 targets, like he just looks different. He is explosive.
It's going to be unlikely that Javonte Williams has 11 catches that often.
Of course.
It may not happen again this year. That being said, what those 11 catches underscore is that he's an awesome pass catcher. So that number may not be 11 in most weeks, but it could be 4 or 5, which helps sets the floor for Javonte Williams. The eye test certainly favors Javonte Williams as well. Looked like one of the better players on the field last night. The only concern that you had about Javonte Williams coming into the season was just how much of a role would Melvin Gordon play. And the problem with Melvin Gordon is that, as Daniel just pointed out, he's still good.
He's really good.
Right? Like, he's still a really solid player in the NFL. So the fact that he got 12 rushes and 2 receptions and goal line work.
I was just going to say, by the way, the goal line work, evenly split. Not for the reason that you might think, but it was like one fumbles at the goal line, the other fumbles at the goal line. I mean, that was fantasy heartbreak extraordinaire. But look, they're both going to have opportunities. I don't think, here's the thing. Melvin Gordon said they want Javonte to be the guy.
He did.
You look at it, you think Javonte could be the guy.
Yeah.
But yet the way it's executed, Melvin Gordon still has a decent role. I mean, he's RB2 worthy for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
So Javonte, just to put a pin in it, I would just say that like there were enough good things to offset the only 7 rushing attempts for Javonte. I got to be totally honest. I think that the Broncos will eventually just say to themselves, the margin for error when you fall to 0-1 in a division that's really good and a schedule that's going to include a lot of difficult teams is pretty thin. If they need Javonte Williams to be more featured in the running game, they will do so in a hurry. So I remain encouraged. Melvin Gordon, a solid player, but I still think probably touchdown dependent, as I think everybody who watched the game knows. Both of these guys fumbled at the 1-yard line last night, which is almost unfathomable. So each of their days could have looked a little bit different. But Javonte Williams still has the clear edge, and super encouraged because 11 receptions. I mean, that's ridiculous. Yeah. He is a star in the passing game if he gets those opportunities.
And to your point, Field, no one's expecting 12 targets, but his ability to he caught 11 of 12 passes, and he capitalized on a good number of them. He just runs so hard from that standpoint.
He's a tank,
first time seeing Jerry Judy and Cortland Sutton last night, Stephania. Listen, watching 7 targets apiece for both of them. I'm not sure. I picked Jerry Judy between the two in Monday Night Tailgate last night. I picked Jerry Judy between the two. I'm not sure that I really leave this game, though, feeling super favored one over the other from that standpoint.
Maybe it's because there were also 4 tight ends targeted during the game. I mean, I think it took a long time for me to see. I was like, where's Cortland Sutton? Where's Cortland Sutton?
And who was the wide receiver they were passing to in that first drive that I've never heard of?
Andrew Beck, who's a fullback / tight end. Yeah.
There you go.
Exactly.
There you go.
The one you think is wide receiver, they're tight ends. They were saying on the broadcast that they have 4 tight ends, and Nathaniel Hackett wanted to get all 4 involved. And that's why I tweeted at the end of the night when I was like looking through the depth chart. I'm like, no kidding. He really did get all 4 tight ends involved. Why? Ruining my fantasy night.
Yeah. He's got Jerry Judy and Cortland Sutton and Javonte Williams. Why are you throwing to 4 tight ends, Nathaniel Hackett? Come on, man.
Well, I left last night, and as I was doing my rankings, finalizing them this morning, I decided to place Jerry Judy and Cortland Sutton directly next to each other.
Yeah.
Because the snap share, pretty much the same. Target share, pretty much the same. Cortland Sutton had a couple of deep targets that if he catches one of them, and I believe there was one that was called for a long pass interference penalty on Tariq Woolen, the Seahawks rookie cornerback. If he catches that, we're talking about this a little bit differently. Encouraged by both of them, right? Yep. Neither one of them cracked the top 15 in wide receiver rankings coming into the season because you figured enough work for each of them to kind of cannibalize the other a tiny bit. Last night played out kind of like you hoped and expected. Really good quarterback. They're going to get vertical opportunities. And as we saw Jerry Judy last night, when he has the ball in his hands, he's pretty special. He's on explosive. That 67-yard touchdown catch. It's a play that he probably ran for 40 yards after the catch and showed that speed is legit. Very slippery. I would say a solid night, a solid start for both of these players. I think they kind of are that borderline wide receiver 2 conversation.
Last thing for the Broncos, Russell Wilson didn't look fantastic. Not sure you're going to do a whole lot about that. You'll still be starting him. I did not love the Seahawks fans' reaction to Russell Wilson. Just on a personal level, I did not appreciate it. And we can disagree here. For me, as a Lions fan, I loved watching Matthew Stafford go somewhere else. And then having the Lions root for the guy that dedicated a decade to their city, not have people boo somebody who after a decade of dedicating themselves to the city decided they're going to live. You can root against the Seahawks, but it felt like they were rooting against Russell Wilson for some reason that I didn't understand.
They were just being, 12th man and all, being noisy.
I think the circumstances were dramatically different between Matthew Stafford leaving. It was time for him to move on from the Lions. Russell Wilson took a step out the door last year when he named 4 teams he would agreed to get traded to.
Doesn't bother me.
The reverence for Matthew Stafford is unmistakable in Detroit. There's always been some rumblings about people, even teammates that helped Russell Wilson win a ton of games, were not necessarily always the biggest fan for him. And I think... And we all have a tremendous amount of respect for the football player Russell Wilson is, the human he is on and off the field. He's also not for everybody. He does a lot of stuff that, for lack of a better term, kind of rubs you the wrong way. A little bit corny, right? I mean, showing up in that mint green suit last night.
You're not wrong about that.
But you know that the thing is, when you show up in that suit, it means you got to go to the podium in that suit.
You sure do. That's right. So again, that's a little awkward. I'm just saying. I don't think it's going out on a limb to say that, like, there are certain quarterbacks that just like. One of the guys, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a single person that doesn't love them, right? Like Jimmy Garoppolo, like the most popular player in the 49ers last year, right? Russell Wilson, there was a different tenor surrounding his exit than there was some of the other exits of recent top quarterbacks.
Daniel still does not appreciate
Still don't agree. That's all right, which is all right. Let's talk about Sunday Night Football from that standpoint, because I think the big takeaway here, obviously, Stephania, we know this. Dak ended up hurting his thumb, going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. And that's where we're at right now. Any updates that you have as far as Dak from what we've received so far?
Yeah, I think this is, I haven't been on the podcast since this all happened, but Dak injures his thumb at the end of Sunday night's game, and we hear about him undergoing surgery, and the initial estimate was 6 to 8 weeks. And it just sounded like, based on the information that was coming out, that he was going to have a plate and a pin put in, that it all made sense. And with a bye in week 9, you kind of thought half the season. But this morning, Jerry Jones saying that they are not going to put Dak on IR. And he was saying that on his radio appearance this morning, that they're not going to put Dak on IR because they believe he has a real shot to come back within the 4-game window. They are very happy with how surgery went. They think that he's going to be back throwing the ball sooner rather than later. I want to tell you why this changes what we think about what happened in surgery. Okay. They did not put a pin, because a pin would have meant immobilizing his thumb for a longer period of time while the pin was in there. It meant they put a small plate and screws to stabilize the fracture. And once you get the wound healing from that, because the hardware is in place, you can actually start moving that thumb and getting the motion back. This is not only critical for, us, like, oh, when might Dak come back? This is actually great news for him and his future, his health overall, because your thumb is so critical for your grip strength, for being able to hold the football. if you can get motion early and start working your way back, it just changes the whole outlook. So I would not say count on him in 4 weeks, but I would say this is largely good news. It changes the trajectory of his recovery potentially, and he could be back sooner than the original window.
So people like me, we are simpletons. We have tiny pea-sized brains. We are scared because last year it felt like Russell Wilson was going to initially miss 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 weeks, and then all of a sudden he does not get placed on IR. Even if he was like, "We're going to miss 3 games and that's it. I'm going to be back." Is there any analog between what Russell Wilson went through last year and what Dak Prescott is currently facing?
Just that they were injuries in the hand and there was hardware put in. So different location, different, different type of injury.
Yep.
Russell Wilson missed 3 games. There was a bye week. So the total time out was 5 weeks. I think, the danger of putting this out there is that you put a lot of pressure on your quarterback. Like, okay, people are going to start looking when it gets to be close to 4 weeks. Like, how close is he to coming back? And we know not everybody heals on the same time scale.
Yeah.
But I think my takeaway right now, so for fantasy purposes, I wouldn't say count on him in 4 weeks, but it's interesting because, Daniel, when I was driving in, you guys were talking, did the reaction to the Dak injury. You were talking about stashing him on IR. I probably wouldn't have, given what I originally thought was going to happen with him, because I thought it's going to be week 9 and maybe a little longer, especially if he has stiffness in his thumb and it's hard to get back. This tells me no other damage besides the fracture. Again, a faster trajectory towards clearance. I feel much better about what Dak could look like when he returns than I would have with the original information.
Okay, all good stuff right there. So why don't we dive into, if it's okay, Daniel, because, by the way, the reason I asked about Russ was he looked like a different player after the injury last year. So I feel better about this one now. And I'll just... a couple things that we said yesterday, but CeeDee Lamb goes from a player that we thought had a legit pathway to a top 5 wide receiver season to a guy who for now remains in my lineups. 11 targets last week. I should expect a large target share week over week. Closer to wide receiver 20 this week than he is wide receiver 10, which is where he was last week.
Easily the most impacted Cowboy out of all the Cowboys from a fantasy perspective.
I would say so. And Dalton Schultz, I think, is going to be close to okay. A, there aren't a lot of really good tight ends. And B, as we know, like Dalton Schultz, I think, had 7 catches for 62 yards last week. That's less than 9 yards per catch. Like a lot of his damage is throws 3 to 5 yards down the field. I know Cooper Rush is not great. He can make those throws much more capably than he can make some of those deep out cuts to CeeDee Lamb or vertical shots down the field. So I don't think that Dalton Schultz is dramatically impacted by this. And, for Zeke and Tony Pollard, hard to say with great certainty how much things change. You would think that the Cowboys would probably be forced to run the football a little bit more.
A little more ball control. If I had Cooper Rush under center, I'd want to probably not have the ball in his hands more often than not.
I think the big question is, like, are they capable of being a ball control offense with an offensive line?
That line, yeah.
It's not great. And then a defense that actually was really good in week 1. Maybe that's the saving grace. And so I think that Zeke doesn't catapult way up my rankings, but sort of fortifies that standing as like a low-end RB2, even after a pretty, I would say, unimpressive week 1.
Yeah, to your point about CeeDee Lamb field, I have him all the way down at wide receiver 18 this week. Still cracks my low-end wide receiver 2 conversation, but all of these guys are impacted by Dak for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and that's something you're going to have to look at when you are playing Dallas Cowboys in your fantasy lineup. You're now going to have to start looking at, all right, do I need more floor? Do I need more upside? Maybe with some of the other plays that you have, because the quarterback situation here is going to be tough. Yeah. Tough sledding. All right, Stephania, let's talk about a couple more injuries that we have here from the week, if you do not mind.
Oh, yes. These are important ones.
All right.
Do you want to recuse yourself? Do you want to just step away? Like, what the heck?
Oh, the Niners. I just, I don't know which thing I'm more depressed about, like the outcome of the game.
You know what? Hold on. Sorry. Before we do that, Stephania, I'm sorry. I skipped a bunch of the Buccaneers stuff. I forgot we didn't talk about the Bucs.
No, I think you're good
whatever.
there.
We're following your lead.
Let's just talk about them really quickly, okay? Tom Brady didn't look fantastic, but he's going to be fine.
He's got a lot of stuff going on.
He's got a lot of stuff going on.
Dallas defense, I thought played well.
They played
the
really
offensive line for the Bucs sort of had some of the concerns where I thought fairly founded, and Tristan Wirfs now dealing with Donovan Smith, their left tackle, is dealing with an elbow issue. So, yeah, but I think probably more to the point is we now have a Chris Godwin injury, Stephania.
Yep.
Yeah, so Chris Godwin left with a hamstring injury, was ruled out at halftime, and I just want to say something about this. It's not so much about the fact he had a hamstring issue during the game. It's about how they manage it afterward. And the reason I say that is because hamstring injuries are the number one injury outside of something happening with inside the knee for players coming off of an ACL. And 23 to 27% of athletes coming back from an ACL, NFL players, will have a hamstring injury within 18 months after tearing their ACL. That comes from our friends at Fantasy Predictors who have great medical data to support this analysis. But think about that. 23 to 27% is position dependent somewhat. Wide receivers, what means like 1 in 4 guys coming off an ACL will have a hamstring injury. If you saw the play, he was in an awkward position. There were a number of things that might have contributed to it. He looked pretty good before that. They're going to be conservative with how they bring him back. And so I expect him to miss several weeks, but this was not a serious hamstring injury in the scope of what it could have been.
Okay. All right. Let's keep on moving there from that then. Elijah Mitchell sprained his MCL. He's going to be out up to 2 months per Adam Schefter. Stephania, do you have any more updates on Eli Mitchell here?
Yeah, I think, an MCL injury in a running back is bad because it impairs your ability to plant and cut. That's it also impairs your power movement going forward. So obviously you want him to get better. The 49ers have a history of bringing players back a little too early and then they go out again. So I think this is a conservative projection and it's probably smart for them to do it. It'll be Jeff Wilson who's up next and then probably behind them some split between Tyrion Davis-Price and Mason, the other running back who was active last week because he contributes on special teams, TDP inactive, but I think they're going to start to work him in more. But Jeff Wilson is going to be their new number one.
We'll dive into Jeff Wilson more with Eric Moody in the waiver wire here in a little bit. Keenan Allen left the game early with a hamstring, Stephania, and the Chargers play on Thursday night. So where are we at on Keenan?
Good.
No, it's not.
But when he left, he said it wasn't that serious. He said I thought Lindsey Theory's tweet was so funny. He said that it was possible he could play on Thursday night. She reminded him it was just 4 days later, and he was like, well, small possibly. Small possibly. And I think, you look at the average missed time, even for a mild hamstring, is like 1.3 games. So most guys are going to miss, and that's on a 7-day cycle. When you're talking 4 days, that's a really quick turnaround. Yesterday, Brandon Staley said they hadn't decided. They were still working through some medical things, but I would be inclined to think he will not likely play Thursday night.
Okay, we got 2 more injury updates, both from the same game in week 1. Naji with his foot injury. Any updates there? And then T. Higgins in the concussion protocol. How far along is he?
Yeah, well, Naji Harris had the foot issue. And for all the people who are like, yeah, the Liz Frank, he wasn't right. They put him out too soon. Stop it. Go back and look at the tape. Look at the play and look what happened. I've watched it about 40 times. He got his foot. He had a defender falling on his foot as his foot was rolled in. His knee was being bent forward. His back was hyperextended. He's lucky he didn't come out with a hip, back, knee, ankle injury. What he did was he tweaked that area of his foot. Now, if the tests were negative, it means it's not unstable. Yeah. So it is not a surgical situation. This is rest recovery. My analogy is guys who have a high ankle sprain, when they first come back, they'll kind of tweak it, sore for a couple days, then they're fine. Naji will be fine. Want to go back in the game. He will play this week.
I was going to say, one piece of advice, don't go back and watch the play. It was pretty nasty.
Yeah. But I mean, just for if people are like, oh, well, of course it was his foot. I'm like, are you kidding me? Yeah. Tell me, actually, it's a testament to him that he came away with just, bruised foot.
Just that.
As opposed to,
those people that hang on to the dark web, you guys can go watch it. The rest of us that are normal, don't watch it.
It's what I do. For a living, I watch injuries over and over.
Yeah. I basically pass out when I see blood. Stephania is like, oh, I would love to watch your open heart surgery right now.
As long as it doesn't involve eyeballs.
Do you have HD? Okay.
I don't do eyes.
Eyes are wow, we found Stephania.
I don't do paper cuts. Okay, so.
Oh, God, those are painful. I'm not going to think about it. All right, T. Higgins, you asked about.
T. Higgins, in the concussion protocol, Stephania, we know concussions are not linear.
Yes,
You've taught us that a number of times.
Thanks for listening.
Yes,
here's the thing. Just a reminder for folks that the progression is basically they have to become asymptomatic at rest. They get light cardiovascular stress. They have to stay asymptomatic. Then they can integrate low-level football activities, and then they get to high-level football activities. Before they can return to play, they have to be cleared for contact and cleared by both the team physician and the independent neurological consultant before they can return to action. We often see guys come back within 7 days. Bengals sound encouraged about T. Higgins, but because we use that nonlinear, it means don't expect, even if there's good progress early in the week, a guarantee for Sunday.
Sure. All right. We're going to pay some bills here with some live reads, come back with a new segment called Impress, Regress, or Assess. But first, Football fans, the first Sunday of the NFL season is here, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is giving new customers a can't-miss offer to celebrate the return of the NFL season. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $200 in free bets instantly, and it has an added bonus. Everyone can experience the thrill of DraftKings early win promotion. It's simple. Bet on an NFL team to win. If your team loses by 10 at any point, leads by 10 at any point during the game, you get paid instantly, even if your team loses. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code FFF to get $200 in free bets instantly when you place a $5 bet this Sunday. That's code FFF only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. 21 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Tennessee, call or text Tennessee Red Line at 1-800-889-9789. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. Bonus issued as free bets. One early win token issued at opt-in. Moneyline bets only. Deposit and wagering restrictions apply. Eligibility and terms at DraftKings.com/football terms. Bam.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance? Of course you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help, like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage. Plus, add an easy-to-use mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance and more, and Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
Stephania, that was still an A. It doesn't make a difference that it was a short one. It was still an A read.
I'm
want
a
you to know
straight A student.
I was not. All right. If you are hanging out in our YouTube chat today, you're hanging out with our good buddy Kyle Soppe, who is always in there. Make sure that if you are hanging out, Kyle, do we have any crazy people in chat today? I know we have a lot of the same people. Well, we have a lot of the same people that come back every week.
People that watch
crazy.
Naji Harris
By the way,
injuries and open heart surgery.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's some people that want to get rid of Naji Harris or make some rash moves, but generally, chat's a pretty good spot to be. The water's warm. Come in. We'll help you. We'll get you sorted out. It's a good place to be.
I love it. Join the YouTube chat. Any
Dip
questions?
Your toe in the pool. The
Thirsty
water's warm.
Kyle is going to have you figured out in no time. All right, let's do impress, regress, or assess after a crazy week one. You may be on the fence on how to evaluate some of the standouts, but do you know what you need? You know you not need to be on the fence for? Which credit card you're supposed to get. With NerdWallet side-by-side comparisons of the top credit cards, you don't have to be. NerdWallet, the smartest decision for all your financial decisions. And we're going to run through a list of players that had some pretty decent weeks in week one. And the question is, were we impressed by what they did? Do we expect them to regress based on what happened last week? Or do we need more time to be able to assess to figure out where we're at on a handful of these players? And I'm going to start first. Jameis Winston field. I got to assess Jameis a little bit more. 23 for 34, 269 yards, 2 touchdowns, 9 rushing touchdowns. Currently QB6. I liked what I saw from him, but he's not somebody from that standpoint. He's not just going to jump in as a top 10 quarterback for me. I need a few more weeks of Jameis before I'm able to put him up into this category.
Just one thing. He had 9 rushing yards, not touchdowns.
Oh,
that would have been a record. And really, I would have been really impressed. I will just say that this week's going to tell me a lot because they play the Bucs this week, right? Atlanta, a team that's going to be really well coached on defense, but still not there personnel-wise. So I'm with you. I will assess for one more week. That being said, if you have Dak Prescott, there are not a ton of options. So Jameis Winston is at least one of them. I've got him outside my top 20, though, in my initial quarterback ranks.
I also feel the need to chime in on some of the Jameis Winston first full game since tearing his ACL and MCL and a meniscus. Like, you got to remember that most of these starters have not played 60 minutes of football. So even as we're weighing in, that was, to me, I would have put him under impressed, but I'm looking at it from a different lens.
That's fair. All right, what about Jarvis Landry then, Stephania? 7 catches on 9 targets for 114 yards. Currently wide receiver 15. I am as a regress candidate more than anything else. Not that we didn't love the game and that we haven't seen it from Juice, but where are you at with him?
I don't know. I think I was impressed. I actually think, we're going to talk about Michael Thomas in a second, but I think Jarvis Landry is going to be a consistent safety valve for Jameis Winston. So I think the volume could remain.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm going to assess this one. Here's the part that I'm assessing is what's the role of Chris Olave going forward?
That's my question.
Because it looked like in the second half, Jarvis Landry and Michael Thomas were clearly the 2 go-to wide receivers. If Chris Olave has a larger role, then maybe I think Jarvis Landry is more likely to fall off than Michael Thomas is to fall off.
Really? I think they're reversed.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. But Jarvis Landry, a heart and soul player for the Saints, that much is clear after one game. So I wouldn't be stunned if he has some reasonable volume. But over 100 yards and 7+ catches in a game, I think is going to be difficult for him to repeat.
I agree with that. Michael Thomas, same game. 8 targets, 5 catches for 57 yards and 2 touchdowns. Stephania looked great in his first action back.
Yeah, I'm happy for him. I mean, super impressed just with how he looked. Glad that he got into the end zone. Like I thought all of that was really important for him after being out of football for essentially almost 3 years. My concern with Michael Thomas, and I said this on Sunday, is not how he starts, but can he finish and how he will finish. So I love this fast start. I mean, if you're happy if you have him on your fantasy roster, I think Chris Olave is an up and comer, and I think that's where that those two. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, I would say impressed with obviously the fact that he had 2 touchdowns and came back and stayed on the field after a couple of really difficult seasons over the past 2 years. No two ways about that. The 8 targets is good as well. The thing that really unlocked Michael Thomas, though, was not 8 targets. It was like 12 targets in a game consistently, because he's never going to be a big yards per catch player. But based off where we evaluated him coming into the season as like a borderline wide receiver 3, top end wide receiver 4, impressed. Good solid start here for Michael Thomas.
Great start for Michael Thomas. All right, what about Taysom Hill? 4 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown plus a catch for 2 yards.
On now.
Can we just be done with Taysom Hill in fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all probably agree here. It's a regress, right? I mean, he did have.
It's interesting because our friend Mike Triplett
Yeah.
has been bullish on him. And in fact, he texted me right when this happened, right when Taysom scored. And he goes like, I told you Taysom Hill, because he feels that this role, which we saw from him before he went through the quarterback exercise, was kind of the role that they had for him, and that this kind of thing could happen. I agree with you, Field, that I don't think you can bank on it every single week, but I think this is going to be the game you get from Taysom Hill here and there, a little roller coaster.
Happy for the long rush. He had a 57-yard rush. He also ran just 4 routes on Sunday. So I think that the opportunities are pretty dramatically limited here for Taysom Hill. He's a regression for me.
But I think his opportunities will come in the red zone, and that's where it gets interesting. Like maybe a deep league flex when you're looking for somebody who has an opportunity to score a touchdown.
I had him pegged as a bye-week fill-in when you need a dart throw at tight end for someone. It's like you don't know which week you're going to get it from Taysom Hill, but maybe you happen to get it the week that you need it.
Maybe the week you need it.
Field, you have been all in on CEH from this standpoint. 10 touches, 3 catches, 74 yards, 2 touchdowns. I want to assess it a little bit more, although I was definitely impressed, but understanding the Chiefs got up big, and they had a couple of the running backs that played a fair amount from that game. That's why I want to assess it a little more. But I loved watching CEH.
No. I was during the preseason, I was nervous about CEH, right?
Correct.
Like, I said, hey, I'm
the Irish Twins.
I'm going to stay
until
in.
he became when he's a member of.
No, I mean I've got him on like 4 rosters. As I said like
cheering.
I'm nervous, but I'm also drafting him. There's no player I bypass entirely in fantasy, right?
Which is why you have DK Metcalf and why
DK Metcalf, who also last night 7 catches, which is as we talked about. So there was some really good with CEH. The most important things were that in the first quarter, it was CEH as the go-to guy.
Yep.
So that suggests he is the nominal starter.
Yep.
B, he got the goal line work that we talked about, right? I mean, he had 2 touchdowns on Sunday. He had, I think it was like 3 opportunities from the 5-yard line and in for CEH. Those are a couple things that in the past had not been nearly consistent enough. What I want to see more of is what does this running back split look like going forward? Because we did see some Jerick McKinnon in the first half. Isaiah Pacheco mostly played when this game was out of reach.
Right?
Yep. And then the other thing is just, I know 3 catches is good for CEH, but does that number ever bubble to 5 or 6? Because if he has games where he gets 12 carries and 3 catches and doesn't score, he doesn't have the same upside as some of the players that finished comparable to him in week 1 amongst running back scorers.
Do you remember when he entered the league, his first NFL game? Do you remember how they put him in that goal line situation?
Yeah,
And then
like
it was
5
like,
straight carries.
He couldn't get
Yeah.
in, he couldn't get it. And I felt like that sort of ruined him. There was a confidence issue. They weren't using him at the goal line. And I thought this weekend, I was like, maybe the time has come. Like, we're going to circle back there, and maybe we'll see him used in that way.
Well, one of the rare teams where they're just as likely to throw it as they are to run it from the 1-yard line.
Well, one of his touchdowns was an underhand shovel pass.
That's awesome.
Well,
which is a run, but it's a
Get an
pass.
extra
You talking about great design? I would love to go on break that play. It was awesome.
It was so great.
So good.
Stephania, James Robinson, 12 touches, 1 catch, 69 yards, which is nice, and 2 touchdowns. Looks fantastic in his return.
I was so happy
Impressed.
for him. I was impressed. Yeah, impressed, and also just the PT in me was smiling. Like this is what you love to see when a guy comes back from a devastating injury to end his season. And also, James Robinson, just last year, everything he went through, the way that offense was being run, and we kept hearing how Trevor Lawrence wanted James Robinson on the field, and then there was going to be more James Robinson. There wasn't. So for him to come back and make this statement, I was told that they were going to allow him to go as he felt good. You know, basically see how he looked. As long as he felt good, they would let him keep going, and that's what they did. And I'm really happy for him. I think for fantasy purposes, it's going to make it interesting, right? Because James Robinson and Travis Etienne, you guys can
have both of them
have
there.
an opinion on that.
Yeah.
Travis Etienne didn't have probably the game that he wanted to start out his professional career, but I thought for James Robinson, I was impressed, and I don't see the workload going anywhere.
No, I mean, Field, when I was ranking these two guys this week, it was tough. Way tougher than it was week one with James Robinson and Travis Etienne. Do you have any slate on which one you would have higher in week two? Obviously, things can change here. Do you like Travis Etienne or James Robinson? Or
I think you have to leave James Robinson for this week until we learn more here. Travis Etienne did get some passing game utilization, but just 5-6 carries for Travis Etienne in week one. That part was surprising to me.
All right, we got Damien Pierce and Rex Burkhead both taking on the Colts. Field, and we broke this down the other day.
Let's focus in on Damien Pierce here, and obviously I need to assess it further.
Yep.
You can't really regress, but this is extremely disconcerting if you're somebody that made the leap on Damien Pierce and drafted him as your RB2, because that was where he ended up going for some people as August almost became September, right? The hype got a little bit out of control there. And in a game in which the Texans were up for most of it, you would think to yourself, that's how Damien Pierce is unleashed, right? Really good runner, a guy that had explosive plays in the preseason, and instead, Rex Burkhead had a 49-19 snap edge. Rex Burkhead had more carries, he had more targets, he had more catches, he had more yards, he had more fantasy points. Disconcerting for Damien Pierce. Hopefully this is one of those that it changes over the next couple of weeks, but circumstantially you'd think that it would have happened in week one.
Did you hear what Lovie Smith said after? It sounded like there was a disconnect there, because he was like, oh yeah, we had more plans for Damien Pierce. And then it was... I don't know what happened. I'm not going to answer what happened. I'm going to tell you that it felt to me like it didn't go the way he thought it was maybe going to go. And I agree with you, Field, assess, but I'm not worried. Damien Pierce is going to emerge. It's going to happen.
I thought it was interesting, though, just the same way that I just said on Rashad Penny. Game script was perfect for them. They were up 20-3. Give the ball to Damien Pierce and let him run the ball. It was weird for me.
Correct. And by the way, they play the Broncos this week. They're 9.5-point underdogs on the road. So
that's going to be...
If this game is... If the Broncos play more like we thought the Broncos would play, and if the Texans play more like we thought the Texans might play, then it could be that Rex Burkhead plays 80% of the snaps on Sunday.
I hope not.
Definitely monitoring this one. I mean, maybe you're right, Stephania. There was a coaching disconnect.
I'm going to manifest it into reality because I have a lot of shares of Damien Pierce. And so
you and everyone else that listens to the podcast.
Lovie and I are going to mentally, mind meld, and we're going to make that happen.
Another guy that I really loved, A.J. Dillon. I had him as running back 21 heading into the week. 15 touches, 5 catches for 91 yards total and a touchdown. 5 catches for A.J. Dillon is the big takeaway from me there. Obviously got into the end zone. I have him as a top 20 running back this week. He was better than Aaron Jones.
He got the ball a lot more,
and he got the ball quite
right
a bit
after
more.
the game. Matt LaFleur is lamenting the fact that Aaron Jones only got 8 opportunities. Well, A.J. Dillon had 15 on Sunday. This goes back to the end of last season, really even the second half of last season, where it basically became a timeshare. Even though Aaron Jones played more snaps than A.J. Dillon on Sunday, we, A, saw them on the field quite a bit together, and B, A.J. Dillon's getting quality carries. And Aaron Jones, really good player who scored a lot of touchdowns in his career. But if you have the ball at the 1-yard line, which player would you prefer to give the ball to? Derrick Henry's cousin or Aaron Jones, who's a really good player, but probably about 35 pounds lighter than A.J. Dillon.
From that standpoint.
And by the way, Daniel, props to you. You've been high on A.J. Dillon for the entire preseason.
I've loved A.J. Dillon. I'm excited. You know what, Field, is it still true that Romeo Doubs was the highest scoring wide receiver with 37 receiving yards?
It was a weird day. Not only that.
Is it true that Devontae Adams had more receiving yards than the entire Packers wide receiving corps?
If I need to go double check this, but I believe I saw on Twitter, I'm sorry, I don't know who this was that tweeted this offhand.
Field's getting old.
No Packers wide receiver played more than 70% of the snaps. My takeaway is we miss you, Alan Lazard.
Yeah. Seriously.
Maybe we'll see him on Sunday, because if he plays and he's healthy enough to play a full game, then you would hope he plays 70-plus snaps. If he does not and he's fully healthy, then the answer could just be running backs this year for the Packers.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Hunter Renfrow, Stephania taking on the Chargers. I have an assess here. 3 catches on 6 targets for 21 yards. We watched Davante Adams be really involved. Darren Waller, still a really great tight end. I'm not out on Hunter Renfrow after week 1, but
no, I'm not out on him yet. I have to admit to not see. This is a game I want to go back and watch. But I was disappointed in the production because Derek Carr has always looked to him favorably. He's another one we talk about these safety valves or safety outlets, and that's what Hunter Renfrow has been. But maybe he just didn't need it because he had Davante Adams.
Yeah, he did, and that's what I'm going to find out. We're assessing. Derek Carr and Davante Adams have a 12-year chemistry going, right?
Yeah. And by the way, ESPN Daily, if you haven't heard that podcast on how they nearly died together, it'll explain the chemistry between those two.
But
wait,
17 targets. 17 targets for Davante Adams. That's the 3rd most he's ever had in a game. Maybe Derek Carr is going to make him the crutch player, and how can you blame him when he's the best wide receiver or one of the best wide receivers in the NFL? I do think, though, that better days are ahead for Hunter Renfrow.
It's almost like when you trade for a superstar wide receiver, you should just force feed them the ball as much as possible. I am very.
It worked for the
Eagles and for the Raiders.
It worked. I mean, every wide receiver that we talked about as a top tier guy seemed like he played extremely well in week 1.
Really well. Yeah, Stephania. How about another person near and dear to your heart? I have Debo Samuel actually as an impress. 8 carries, 52 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches on 8 targets. 14 yards, only 12.6 fantasy points, but that game was awful because of the weather.
It's really hard to take away much of anything from that game because it was a total slop fest. So, anything in the passing game to me goes out the window. But here's what does matter. Debo in the running game. So if anybody thought they were going to stop Debo from running the ball, by the way, did you see his touchdown?
Yes.
Okay. Also, now they don't have Elijah Mitchell. So the people running the ball are going to be Jeff Wilson, Debo Samuel, and Trey Lance.
Yep.
Those are your running backs. So,
but I also will say, like you said, anything in the passing game doesn't count from Sunday. One thing does: 8 targets.
Yeah, he's still.
That's true.
That number might go down,
they
but
weren't
if it hovers around 6 or 8 and he's getting 8 or 10 rushing attempts too, he's Debo Samuel of late 2021.
It's just it's hard for me to know what that will look like. Now they play Seattle this week.
They do.
So I think there's going to be a lot of motivation to have a totally different game this weekend.
Feel DJ Moore. We watched him with Baker Mayfield under center really struggle here in week 1. 3 catches on 6 targets for 43 yards, only 8 fantasy points. I need more time to assess because I watched Robbie Anderson have a lights out week 1.
Which, by the way, I'm okay with that. Like Robbie Anderson, remember, he's making $14.5 million per year. He's no slouch. Both of them played 100% of the snaps. DJ Moore getting 6 targets, not ideal. They had an exorbitantly low number of plays. 53 offensive snaps for the Panthers on Sunday. That's bad.
Really bad.
That's bound to go up. Like, that's a hard number to repeat. If they play 65 or 70% or 70 snaps in a game, that means probably somewhere between like 8 and 12 more passing opportunities. That probably means, as DJ Moore saw a 22.2% target share on Sunday, it probably means somewhere between another target or 2, another catch or 2. I think this will equalize pretty soon. I still love myself some DJ Moore.
Matt Rule, hopefully in that coach's room, is saying 2 things we need to fix going into week 2.
Christian McCaffrey.
Give the ball to Christian McCaffrey more often.
Please.
Give the ball to DJ Moore more often.
Yeah, that was weird.
Hayden Hurst taking on the Steelers.
Happy for him.
5 catches on 8 targets, 46 yards, 9.6 fantasy points. Here's the big thing. Ran a route on 69.2% of dropbacks. Travis Kelce in week 1 did the same thing, 68.3%.
Okay, well, hold on.
All right, go ahead. Pump the brakes. Give it to me.
The Chiefs were up by like 4 touchdowns. They benched their starters. It's a good. More important is that Hayden Hurst played good, but the comparison to Kelce, to me, not relevant here.
The fact that he's out there running routes and being utilized, is that in part because of T. Higgins
first part
being
of
out with the concussion?
Love that's part of it. The second part with the Travis Kelce comparison, just I don't want to mislead people. Like the Chiefs were smothering the Cardinals. We saw Chad Henne in the game. 68% is a good number for
Hayden Hurst.
Thank you. That part I think is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Do you have takeaways from Hayden Hurst from that standpoint?
No, but it confirms, like, he's a talented guy who, especially with T. Higgins being out, now all of a sudden he was a number 3 player. And if Higgins is out again, he could be the number 3 target, number 4, because Joe Mixon had a massive target share in week 1 as well. And this Bengals offensive line doesn't seem to be fixed to me. And if that's the case, they may have to throw the ball quite a bit because if you run as inefficiently as they did, and some of that, by the way, is on Joe Mixon, to be clear, you're going to have to throw it a bunch, and that could be more goodness for Hayden Hurst.
Yeah, a couple things that factor into that. Number goes back to my thing of nobody playing 60 minutes. By the way, Joe Mixon, who lost like 20-something, Joe Burrow, who lost like 20-something pounds after the appendectomy, and really, I mean, this was 4 quarters of football. It was not
5.
a good, well, true.
Yeah.
But it was not a good game for him, but like when you consider physically and mentally where he was coming back, I expect that to change. And Hayden Hurst, if you saw one of his toe tap catches that he made, like to me, that's a trust building thing with quarterback to tight end as a pass catcher. So I think it could be favorable for him going forward.
I'm with you there. All right, we got one more player here, and that's Johan Dotson. I was super impressed by him. 3 catches on 5 targets, 40 yards, 2 touchdowns. Just found the end zone twice. It was interesting. Terry McLaurin was actually the lowest scoring wide receiver between Curtis Samuel, Johan Dotson, and then Terry McLaurin. They get to take on the Detroit Lions next week. I think all of these wide receivers are in a spot where they could continue to smash again with Carson Wentz starting out hot here, Field.
Yeah, the good news was that for Terry McLaurin is that he A, found the end zone, and B, ran the most routes of these 3 wide receivers. But we saw them play a ton of 11 personnel. For Johan Dotson, just 4 targets. Let me get that number correct. Let me make sure that's correct.
5 targets.
5 targets for Dotson. Yep. So obviously scoring 2 touchdowns on 5 targets that's not going to happen every single week. But just a name, I think he belongs as an end of bench stash right now. So impress and regress, right? He's not going to have 2 touchdowns again every single week. He may not have another 2 touchdown game for a while here, but they are playing enough 3 wide receivers, and he's talented enough to have on the radar. And if they craft some opportunities for him, because he's really talented with the ball in his hands, watch out.
It'll be interesting. Logan Thomas, as he comes along, that could push that a little bit as well.
Yeah. I'm interested to see the way that Curtis Samuel actually impacts Jahan Dotson here.
Talk about him in a second, right?
Yeah, I mean, he is a guy. All right, we're going to take another quick break, pay some bills, come back with some waiver wire. But first, Field.
When it comes to choosing top running back, wide receiver, quarterback, even which defense is right for your team on any given week, you know where to turn. But when you're trying to decide on the right credit card for your wallet, the right mortgage lender for your dream home, or the right savings account, where do you go? The nerds at NerdWallet are here to help you make a smart financial decision. NerdWallet is a personal finance site run by money nerds. Think people is obsessed about our personal finance as we are about fantasy sports, who want to share their knowledge with our listeners to help them find the right financial products for them. Let's say you're looking for a new rewards credit card. NerdWallet can help you compare cashback cards side by side so you can feel confident choosing the one that suits your spending. Think of them like your weekly wide receiver PPR rankings, but you're comparing top credit cards that work for you. Ready to make a financial decision? Compare and find top credit cards, savings accounts, and more at nerdwallet.com. NerdWallet, the smartest decision for all your financial decisions. NerdWallet Compare Inc. NMLS 1617539. NerdWallet is not an investment advisor nor an investment broker. Information is for educational purposes only.
Hiring is challenging, especially right now when you have so much on your plate. But luckily, there's one place where you can go where hiring is simple, fast, and smart. A place where growing businesses connected to qualified candidates. That place is ZipRecruiter.com/FFF. ZipRecruiter does the work for you. ZipRecruiter uses its powerful technology to find and match the right candidates up with your job. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. It's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is the #1 rated hiring site based on G2 satisfaction ratings as of January 1st, 2022. And right now, to try ZipRecruiter for free, our listeners can go to ZipRecruiter.com/FFF. That's ZipRecruiter.com/FFF. ZipRecruiter.com/FFF. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. A's across the board as far as live reads go. Both of you did a fantastic job. Anytime we get good reads, I'm always for it. All right, it is now time for our waiver wire portion of this show. It is week 2. You had guys that got hurt. You had guys that underperformed. And Eric Moody is here now to be able to break down everything that you need to know from the waiver wire perspective. Eric, how you doing, buddy?
No, I'm doing great. I must admit, I'm still kind of reeling from the Denver Broncos losing in dramatic fashion to Seattle, but I'm fully caffeinated. I'm ready to talk waiver wire, Dopp.
I love it. Fully caffeinated. All right, this first one's going to hurt me. Let's start at the top with quarterbacks here, and this one hurts. I feel like you're just picking on me personally, but if you happen to have Dak Prescott, if you had an underperforming quarterback in week 1 and you need to go out on the waiver wire and find someone to play here in week 2, who's your quarterback target?
Well, you know what? We're going to go with Carson Wentz here, Washington Commanders. And so, I'm going to go and put this out there. I would say that Carson Wentz is the best Washington quarterback since they had Kirk Cousins. So if you have Dak Prescott, you need to find like someone to fill the void. Hey, let's go with Carson Wentz here. So I'm going to run through some numbers here for you, Dopp. So you look at Wentz. He's the first quarterback to throw 4 touchdowns in the season opener for the Commanders since Billy Kilmer in 1975. He's also the first Commanders quarterback to throw for 4 touchdowns in a game since Kirk Cousins in 2015. I know you saw what I did there. And so with Wentz, he racked up 27.7 fantasy points against the Jaguars in Week 1, demonstrating great rapport with our guy Terry McLaurin, Johan Dotson, and Curtis Samuel. And so he just played really well when passing outside the painted numbers. He was also great on third down. If you look at Wentz on third down, let's talk about that a little bit in more detail.
Yeah.
He went for 9 out of 10 for 134 yards and a touchdown on third down. And that was the best completion percentage on third down by a Washington quarterback since Week 4 of 2016. And the most passing yards on third down since Week 3 going all the way back to 2017. Now, one thing with Wentz in the passing touchdowns, he had 2 touchdowns on throws of 20 air yards or more on Sunday. The last time a Washington quarterback did that was actually back in Week 6 of 2019. We're going all the way back to Case Keenum there, where he threw 2. But just to bring all that together, I would say Wentz and offensive coordinator Scott Turner really appear to be calibrated here. And I'm sorry, Dopp, you'll get why I'm saying I'm sorry right now, but against a questionable Lions secondary, he could repeat his performance that he did in Week 1 and Week 2. And so he's really a great streaming option because we got the Lions on deck for Week 2, the Eagles in Week 3. So to close the loop on that, if you have Dak Prescott, you're reeling, looking for an option, look no further than Carson Wentz.
Yeah, I got to be honest. If the Lions secondary is questionable, they should honestly be doubtful or heading towards pup right now because it's a tough sled in there in that secondary room from that standpoint. Eric, I want to ask you about Carson Wentz's number 1 pass catcher because he also happens to be, I feel like, your top wide receiver target, and that's Curtis Samuel with everything that he did this week. We watched Carson Wentz be able to carve up, I'm sorry, who did they play this last week? I totally forgot. Jacksonville. Watch them carve up Jacksonville, and Curtis Samuel looked fantastic. Do you think that there's more juice left in that orange here in Week 2?
I do. I do think there's some more juice that's here. And I know sometimes it's hard for a fantasy manager. You're constantly kind of looking through the rearview mirror instead of looking straight ahead. But you look at Samuel, he had the type of performance in Week 1 that we expected to see from him last season before injuries ultimately derailed his season.
Yep.
But I want to bring up something that Carson Wentz said, is that he spoke very highly of Samuel during his post-game press conference during the preseason. And so I think we saw a lot of that transfer into Week 1. And it was actually Samuel's 7th game in which he saw double-digit targets. And I just think some fantasy managers are going to overlook this performance because you mentioned about Johan Dotson and how superb that he looked in that game. Hey, but let's not forget, Samuel has a history of producing dual-threat type performances under the guidance of a Ron Rivera-led team. So let's go back to 2020. We're going to rewind the clocks here, back to the future style. So Samuel turned 97 targets into 77 receptions for 851 yards and 3 touchdowns. Furthermore, he added 200 rushing yards on 41 attempts with 2 additional touchdowns. And at the end of the season, you're looking at a player that averaged about 70 total yards per game for the Panthers. And I think that's one of the potential outcomes for Samuel in 2021. He's definitely on the flex radar in Week 2. I know we talked about the Lions. I guess I'll give them a dig again, Dopp. Again, my apologies.
How dare you.
But we saw what A.J. Brown did in Week 1. I was just like, wow. He was just like a man among boys there. And we could see a similar type of performance from Samuel. And so I like him quite a bit, especially if you're reeling from having Keenan Allen, who's looking like he's unlikely to play. So just want to give everyone options.
Yeah, if you aren't able to grab Curtis Samuel or for some reason you just love the Detroit Lions too much to allow yourself to roster Curtis Samuel, Eric, is there another wide receiver out there that had a big Week 1 that you potentially like here in Week 2?
Yeah, I'm surprised we're talking about this name, but I'm talking about Robbie Anderson. That's here.
Right.
And so you look at Robbie Anderson. I know a lot of people are talking about DJ Moore this offseason, myself included. But if you look at Robbie Anderson, he led the Panthers in targets, receptions, and receiving yards in Week 1 against the Browns. And, the Browns, they only had 27, or excuse me, not the Browns, but the Panthers, they only had 27 pass attempts for that game. And you look at Baker Mayfield, his touchdown pass to Anderson, my first thought once I was watching it, on Red Zone, was that that ball traveled quite a bit. And I dove a little bit deeper and it actually traveled 46 air yards. And that's important when you look at the Panthers because they were horrendous last year when throwing deep. And so having Mayfield under center gives them an upgrade in that area. So I think if you're a fantasy manager, especially one in a deeper format, you need a wide receiver. Absolutely add Anderson. He played in, I think it was around 100% of the snaps in week 1. So he'll be involved.
He will be definitely involved. All right, Eric, let's talk about a couple of running backs here. Obviously, we watched Elijah Mitchell unfortunately go down. Next man up, and we've gotten used to this here in San Francisco. It's going to be Jeff Wilson, and someone that should absolutely be rostered. Is he your number one waiver target here in week 2?
Yeah, I'm like, he is my number one waiver target. It's just when you look at his body of work that he's had with the 49ers in the past, you've got to you got to hit the button. So he's in a great situation to step up. I would say, what's the best way to phrase this? I'll say there's a lot of uncertainty, like after Wilson on the after Mitchell. I would say after Wilson. I'll go with after Wilson on the 49ers depth chart. So he's really the safest option right now. So when you look at Wilson, I would say he's a lock for like 10 or more touches in every week that Mitchell misses. And I think we're looking at about 8 to 10 weeks per reports. And I think he should see significant playing time like on third down. Like he played 29 of 38 snaps in the second half of week 1. But I'd be remiss with being like an ex-offensive lineman if I didn't talk about the offensive line play. I had some concerns over the 49ers offensive line going into this game, but I felt like as a unit they played really well, especially when it came to run blocking. So I think that trend will end up continuing. And looking at Wilson, like in each of his 4 starts in 2021, he saw at least 13 rushing attempts. And with Mitchell, you look at his workload from last year, like he averaged 18.8 touches per game. And so part of that workload is what Wilson will be able to absorb. But as we all know, I'm like, Wilson, he's not going to be tasked with taking on the entire like workload. You know, Debo Samuel will obviously be involved. They're going to give him some rushing attempts. We can't forget about Trey Lance as well. But I like Wilson as an upside flex option in fantasy. And then you look at the matchups, very running back friendly. You got the Seahawks for this week. And then after that, you got the Broncos. And we kind of saw what their opponents did to them on the ground in week 1. So I love Wilson.
Yeah, 10 career games with 15 plus touches, 18.9 fantasy points in those games. To your point, if he gets volume while Elijah Mitchell is out, he is going to be the guy. One last running back here, Jamal Williams started out big last year, week 1. This year did the same thing, grabbed 2 goal line scores. Someone that you're looking at here in week 2 waivers?
Absolutely. I'm a big like Jamal Williams guy, but I'm like, isn't this guy like a national treasure?
Yes, he is.
I'm like, I'd be remiss if I didn't include this guy in the waiver wire column. I would go as far as to call him like the star of Hard Knocks. He's got such a, I guess the best way to describe it, like a fun-loving and welcoming personality. And for those that don't know, I'm like, he's BYU's all-time leading rusher. But if you look at week 1, so we got Williams, we got DeAndre Swift, both had superb performances. They both saw double-digit rushing attempts in the season opener. But I was disappointed, Dopp, because they weren't heavily utilized like his receivers. I think, sadly, that may be a trend that will continue. It kind of carried over from last season once Dan Campbell took over play-calling duties. But, hey, nevertheless, you look at Williams. He's averaged 14 touches in 13 active games last season. So if week 1 is any indication, like both running backs are going to be actively involved in the Lions committee. And, you know, Dopp, you got to admit, I'm like, Swift and Williams, they look pretty good running behind this Lions revamped offensive line, right?
They looked pretty nice running behind this offensive line. As long as we can get, listen, we scored 35 points on the Philadelphia Eagles. I realized there was a loss there, but Jamal Williams and this running back committee absolutely look fantastic. Eric, where can everybody follow you, and what else do you have coming out later this week so that people can know where you're at?
Yeah, you can find me on social at Twitter, Instagram, really any of the platforms at Eric N. Moody. The N stands for my middle name, which is Nicholas. So you can find me there. Just look for the guy that looks like Frank Thomas. That's what everyone on social media tells me. But I would say as far as
That's awesome.
Oh, I love that.
I'd say as far as of content, so we got the waiver wire column that's obviously out now on ESPN, so feel free to check that out. If you have any follow-up questions, people that are listening, hit me up on Twitter. But I would say the daily notes, the Fantasy Football Daily Notes, that's published every Monday through Friday to keep you up to date on the fantasy news that you need to know. And also, I help out with sports betting as well, so I'll have picks coming up for the Week 2 slate. But I look forward to interacting with everyone on Twitter. and we'll take it from there.
Heck yeah. Follow Eric Moody on Twitter and keep up with him on the waiver wire all season long.
Yeah.
He's going to make sure that you're set up.
I was going to say, the only thing, though, Moody, is I think you look like Frank Thomas before the Nugenics.
Oh.
Because Frank Thomas has got you by like 100 pounds. Like, Frank Thomas could play linebacker right now.
That's fair.
But it is like those commercials where they're like, hey, do I know that guy?
Oh my God, I know,
You must get that all the time.
That's so good. Hey, I can't help but notice you still have that.
That's funny.
There's still that autograph picture over your shoulder. It looks
It's
like
Andre
you forgot
Johnson,
to
no big
send
deal.
it. Oh,
Yeah,
did you forget to send that to Field? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Next week,
Eric
maybe.
and Moody, and the N means still haven't sent Field
Never
that
gonna
picture
send you
for
that picture.
Andre Johnson. Yeah.
Eric, thank you so much, brother. We will talk with you next week. All right, bud?
No, sounds good.
All right, Field, you got one final thing to take us away here for this show before we close things out.
I'm starving. Do you know what I want right now?
What?
Some Little Caesars pizza.
That's right.
Sounds good.
Time now for a Little Caesars preview, a taste, a bite, a piece of crust. I like the crust of my pizza. Some people don't. But let's look ahead to the week that we have on tap, week 2 and Thursday night. Here's what I'm looking for. We talked about Clyde Edwards-Helaire earlier in the show. How do the Chiefs divide the labor, both at running back and also amongst these wide receivers? So Juju Smith-Schuster had 8 in week 1. That was the most targets of any Chiefs wide receiver. Mecole Hardman had 6. Then Marquez Valdez-Scantling had 4. So while I think that Juju Smith-Schuster remains the best bet, if you have to choose one Chiefs wide receiver, I still buy the idea that Patrick Mahomes was selling us about a week ago, which is that it could be Juju one week and MVS the next week, and Sky Moore the week after that, and Mecole Hardman. So that's what I have my eye on for Thursday night, because I do think CEH is the go-to back for the Chiefs right now, but there will be others that contribute as well. And then 2 storylines for Sunday. Aaron Rodgers and the Packers play on Sunday night. They looked awful in week 1. They play against the Bears, who, of course, played frisky defense and pulled the upset of Stephania's 49ers. And I know, listen, I was not optimistic about Aaron Rodgers coming into the season, but he's still Aaron Rodgers, right? Is this the start of a different year, or is this a 1-week aberration where Aaron Rodgers tells us again, relax? They were terrible in week 1 last year. He went on to win NFL MVP. Right. I still have Aaron Rodgers as a borderline top 10 quarterback for week 2, but those Packers wide receivers could really use Allen Lazard on Sunday night. And then finally, as we talked about, if you drafted Cooper Kupp over Justin Jefferson, over Jamar Chase, over Stephon Diggs, over Devontae Adams, or any of those players over the rest, you were right. All 5 of them were incredible in week 1.
Yeah.
We were all optimistic on those 5 wide receivers, and each one of them delivered. Devontae Adams had over 30 fantasy points and wasn't even the top scoring wide receiver this week for week 1. All 5 were great. Can they keep it up? Because if they do, there were 5 players that you made the case for as a potential first-round wide receiver, and all 5 of them will end up being values at cost, even if you used the number 1 overall pick in the draft on Cooper Kupp, the number 3 overall pick in the draft on Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, number 7 overall pick on Devontae Adams or Stephon Diggs, all of them mashed in week 1, and frankly, by the look of how easy it came, I wouldn't be surprised if it comes throughout the season.
Yeah, Adam Schefter's 3rd overall pick of Jamar Chase in the fantasy marathon draft doesn't look so bad anymore.
I know.
Not bad
I
at
have
all.
Justin Jefferson in the league, and I was like, my goodness.
Yeah, pretty good.
Anytime you have those guys,
play, right?
you're pretty pumped about it. All right, I think that's going to do it for our show today. Anything else you guys want to add before we close out Tuesday's show?
We are back tomorrow. Thanks again for watching 10 a.m. Eastern Time every single day. Go check out the rankings.
Here on out. Me, Field, Stephania tomorrow. Liz Loza is going to join us. Promise this time it's really going to happen. We're going to go through some rankings, have a lot of fun. We love you guys. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you tomorrow. Stephania, why'd you go sleeveless shirt and not tell us? You can't bring the guns out and not let Field and I know, man.
That's kind of a rule about how this
Isn't
works.
that it's always how I roll.
No, that's
Pay attention.
yeah.